Yeah, so as Max said, my name is Aaron, and I recently finished my undergraduate studies at Newcastle University, where I studied joint honours psychology and sport and exercise science. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about psychological interventions and really their effectiveness on well-being and athletic performance, and really where the current research is at in terms of how useful they are for athletes. I'll also go into detail about my dissertation research project and how it may have contributed to interventions within sport, which may be useful for coaches. So firstly, I want to give a background about why this research area is so important. So as we know, mental health plays a huge role in everyone's lives, and especially within elite athletes. So my eyes were particularly opened when Michael Phelps spoke out about his depression and mental health. And this really highlighted the notion that just because elite athletes are on a different level in terms of physiology, this doesn't mean that their mental health should also be ignored. Also, the importance of mental health in athletes has been recognised empirically. For instance, in elite footballers, out of 40% of players who wanted psychological support alongside their training, only 10% actually received this support. So this evidence really highlights that mental well-being is key in athletes, and therefore interventions to support athlete well-being is a vital area in sports psychology. So there's also a strong link between certain psychological traits, such as perfectionism and confidence, and sport performance. For instance, Burton established a strong relationship between confidence and swimming performance, and Martin and Gill also found this relationship in middle and long distance runners. For perfectionism, Andy Hill found a significant relationship between perfectionism and motivation, well-being, and performance. So this consistency across research really highlights the importance of these psychological traits in terms of sport performance, and really gives an idea of the type of interventions that can be used in order to target an improvement in performance in athletes. So despite there being widespread research that confirms confidence and perfectionism play an essential role in athletic performance and mental health, interventions to manage both aspects are a really growing area within sports psychology. What is grounded in research, but it is popular for athletes to implement psychological skills training methods that Dean Watson alluded to earlier. And these include things such as goal setting, self-talk, and a very popular one is imagery. Another intervention method, which I find particularly very interesting, involves the use of cognitive development or restructuring and a behavioural routine. So these kind of interventions can be implemented by coaches or sports psychologists, either face-to-face or through the use of self-help books. For instance, Tracy and Andy actually conducted a study and found that a cognitive behavioural style self-help book called When Perfect Isn't Good Enough actually reduce personal standards and concern over mistakes in footballers, which are basically just dimensions of perfectionism. And another self-help book that you may have heard of or even read is The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters. So this cognitive behavioral style self-help book has been used anecdotally on a vast basis, but it hasn't actually received any empirical support. So the lack of research into the chimp paradox really motivated me to study this using an intervention in athletes. So therefore, for my dissertation, I evaluated the effectiveness of a mind management program based on the chimp paradox on perfectionism and confidence. More precisely, I measured the dimensions of perfectionism that Andy Hill alluded to earlier, self-oriented perfectionism, socially prescribed, other-oriented perfectionism, and perfectionistic cognitions. I also measured trait and state confidence in my dissertation. So for my dissertation, I used a group of 33 athletes from a variety of different sporting backgrounds and levels of ability, from regional level to international level athletes, who were split into a control and an intervention group. So the intervention group took part in a 6-week mind management intervention, all on Zoom, based on the chimp paradox. The intervention group were taught the theory of the chimp paradox and completed tasks based around this concept to implement the theory specific to their individual sports. And on the left side of the screen here is just a summary of each of the sessions that are conducted with the athletes. So the results revealed a significant reduction in self-oriented perfectionism, which is the dimension that involves setting yourself perfectionistic standards as a result of the intervention. With regards to previous research, my findings were very dissimilar. For example, in Tracy's self-help intervention study, they found a significant reduction in perfectionistic cognitions, socially prescribed perfectionism, and all the other oriented perfectionism, but not self-oriented perfectionism, unlike in my study. So it could be said that these research findings have contributed to this area by offering a very novel intervention idea that can help lower self-oriented perfectionism in perfectionistic athletes. So just as a sort of summary, so to my knowledge, this study was the first to examine the effectiveness of a mind management intervention based on the chimp paradox on confidence and perfectionism. It was found this intervention was effective at reducing self-oriented perfectionism, but not for confidence. So these types of guided self-help interventions are therefore worth considering by coaches and sports psychologists when developing strategies or interventions to support athletes who are high in perfectionism, which will then directly have a beneficial impact on their performance. However, it must be said that this research area is ongoing and further clarification is needed to further quantify an intervention method that is able to decrease all aspects of perfectionism. And that's me. Thank you very much for watching. If there's any questions, that'll be great.
Perfect, Aaron. That's a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. Is there any comments or questions from people who've watched? Got nothing in the chat, but if anybody wants to ask a question they've been thinking of, then that'd be fantastic. Just feel free to jump on the mic. If not, I will definitely ask one. I think it's a really fascinating bit of work you've done there, actually. If there was anything you could recommend to a coach that they could go away and do to, based on the work you've done, to influence their perfectionism in their athletes, what would you recommend to them?
Yeah, so Dean Watson was actually talking about this earlier as well, if any of you were in that talk. So he was basically alluding to, if you want to see a longitudinal effect on perfectionism, to use these sort of cognitive behavioral style intervention techniques. And these can absolutely be, you know, implemented by coaches in athletic organizations. You know, it's a weekly sort of thing that I would take to see this reduction in perfectionism based on previous research. And in terms of confidence, obviously my study didn't find anything for confidence, but there is research out there that does allude to psychological skills training interventions that over a long period of time, it's 6 weeks onwards, kind of where you can see this increase in confidence using these PST techniques.